And you're welcome to take this set of pins and stick them into the doll to represent the degree to which you hate them. And again, lots of variance there. We come back after 5 minutes, and some of these dolls are full of pins. And that tends to correlate with, I think this particular study was actually showing the dark tetrad measures in comparison to questionnaire measures of psychoticism, which is, in a sense, answered the question that you often pose yourself when you're listening to a horrible crime described on television, and you wonder, this is such a horrible crime, was the person crazy? Or was the person nasty? And that has legal consequences, doesn't it? You're crazy, you're not guilty. You're just nasty. You can go away for some time for doing nasty stuff. And we found actually that both contributed to the extent that you can measure psychoticism with the questionnaire measures, debatable. We found that independently, the dark tetrad and psychoticism predicted the number of pins that you stuck in this sorry little doll that you were given.
So, Del, you've been delving into the dark side of human behavior for a long time, and you alluded to the fact or the possibility of a certain pessimism that emerged as a consequence of your observation that sometimes anonymous responses are actually more revealing, and anonymous behavior on the net has produced quite the uptick in pathological behavior. But what has been the consequence for you personally in focusing so intensely on this dark area of human proclivity? And well, let's start with that. Oh yes, and then the other thing was, how do you distinguish, let's say, personally and scientifically, between the ethical issue with regard to the dark tetrad behavior and the biological motivations, right? Because your work does skirt that line, right? So you can think about psychopathy as an adaptive mating strategy in some sense on the scientific front, but then when you think about it ethically and personally, it falls into the category of the kind of clearly reprehensible behavior that should get people locked up. So A, what has this done to your view of human nature? And B, how do you thread the needle of scientific evaluation versus moral evaluation?
Well, for me, it started in an undergraduate course where I learned about Machiavellianism and went to work with Richard Christie. So in a sense, I was there from the beginning, what the causal direction was. I'm not sure at that point, but I did do a lot of other work on self-enhancement, etc. Other researchers in my department like to study happy people, and I didn't find them as interesting as the dark side. And certainly I could give a rationale that we're more concerned with the behavior of the dark side than we are with what happy people can do to us. Maybe they could bore us at times, but they're not going to be a danger to us. So studying the dark side is more important, arguably, than there is a light triad now where people have put together some positive traits and kind of followed up on the notion of the dark triad and said, why don't we look at the positive side and see who gives desirable motivations for their behavior. I studied social desirability for a long time, and it never really came together for me because you develop a social desirability scale. Well, it's partly true, and it's partly phony, and that's a terrible confounding, because do you want to hire the person who scores high on social desirability or the person who scores low is perhaps...
Right. I found that very frustrating work as well. I tried to develop scales of self-deception and self-presentation, I ran into, I think, very much the same problem. It's
Yeah.
well, first of all, it's not obvious that it's an independent dimension, right? Because it seems to be quite affected by agreeableness, but it's also not, as you said, it's not obvious what the desirable outcome actually is. Like, do you want the person who tries to make themselves look better than they are during a job interview? And the answer is, well, maybe you do want them because at least they came to the interview and tried. You could say, well, it's fake. But on the other hand, well, putting your best foot forward isn't just fake, it's also a step in the right direction. And so separating those out is extraordinarily difficult. It's also difficult to separate it out from such things as extroversion and trait optimism. And yeah, it was a real morass. I know you did a lot of work on that for a long time, eh?
I don't know if you've heard of integrity tests, but they raised a real paradox, because integrity tests, in a sense, have the opposite rationale to social desirability tests. They ask people who are being hired by big companies, have you stolen from an employer? And a variety of other things that would cause the company a problem if they hired you, but they take it at face value with integrity tests. If you gave those answers on a social desirability test, then researchers would often toss you out because no one...
Because you're lying.
No, you're lying.
Or hypothetically, yeah. Well,
Exactly.
I did know that the integrity tests seem to be valid predictors only to the degree that they marked something like conscientiousness. I never saw any compelling evidence that they really got farther than a good conscientiousness measure. So
yeah, some people have argued that the reason why both of them can work is that social desirability scales are usually used on college students who have higher cognitive abilities. If you're hiring cashiers or someone who's doing muscle work for your company, then it's a little more straightforward. And to some extent, they've got some clever methods, like saying, how much money do you think the typical employee steals from the employer? And it's kind of a projective test built into it in a way, to the extent that someone says, oh yeah, people steal a lot, they're indicting themselves.
Right. They're indicating what they regard as normative. So look, we're out of time here, unfortunately. So thank you. Is there anything else? We're going to turn over to the Daily Wire Plus platform here. I'm going to talk to Dr. Del Paulis